Let's get to the week 11 waiver wire. Let's start with the quarterback position. Who are we picking up this week?
You could be in leagues where Russell Wilson's available, and you could pick him up and start him this week. Russell Wilson has been good. He's had 2 games with at least 18 points, and the third game that he didn't, he had 2 touchdown passes called back. Remember that game a few weeks back? So he's been really good. He's got Baltimore this week. Baltimore's defense is terrible against the pass, guys.
Giddy up.
So you can pick up and start Russell this week. You can also pick up and start Bo Nix this week against Atlanta. Great matchup. Really good matchup. I mean, they gave up 2 touchdowns on Derek Carr, and all of his wide receivers were out last week.
Derek Carr looked like an all-pro quarterback last week.
Yeah, and he should have had a third if Kamara didn't drop that damn ball.
Yeah.
Notice I said Kamara. Justin Herbert's out there on the waiver wire. Geno Smith is out there on the waiver wire. I'm going in order of the quarterbacks that I would like the most, at least. Stafford is still out there. He's got the Patriots coming up this week. And then Drake May, speaking of the Patriots, he's got the Rams. And Drake May's, I know his fantasy numbers haven't been great the last couple of weeks, but he has the potential to give you 18, 19 points in a given week because he can run with the football. But Russell Wilson and Bo Nix are the 2 top guys to get at quarterback this week.
I do like that Herbert versus the Bengals matchup too. And Herbert's been kind of sneaking up on us, I think, because that offense has been framed largely as a run-first offense, and J.K. Dobbins has been the best fantasy asset on the team. So I think that in our world, we continue to kind of think of it like that. But their pass rate over expectation has gone up a lot in the last few weeks. So, and Herbert's been running. Right? Like we talked about this yesterday.
All the carries.
9 rush attempts on Sunday. So Herbert, I think, is interesting. Also, we have to keep in mind for the first half of the season, he was dealing with that injury and he just wasn't totally himself. So I think we're starting to see best case scenario Herbert in these last few weeks, and the Bengals are a matchup where he can have a good game against them for sure. I actually really like Herbert this week. I'll be curious to talk about him tomorrow and find out where you have him ranked. Just because of the plus matchup. Wednesday, of course, being our rankings day. From a running back standpoint, who can we pick up?
It's kind of thin, but Audric Estime is the prize for the week. And I would spend a whole bunch of fab on him because at this point in the season, you're not going to find a running back on the waiver wire with the potential of an Audric Estime. Unless
barring
somebody
injury.
Gets hurt.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, but I mean, he led the team in the Broncos in backfield touches last week, and Peyton likes him. I mean, they all but eliminated Javonte Williams from the offense last week. Lindsay.
Yeah. I do think too, especially when it's somebody like, because we've talked about how you can't necessarily trust what Sean Payton says that they're going to do when it comes to working people into the offense more, because he says that quite frequently. But he did it this past week with Audric Estime. So now we have an example of him getting a huge chunk of the workload, but also the fact that he is a young guy. I kind of think that at this point in the season, when a younger running back starts getting more reps, then maybe we prioritize that more from a waiver wire standpoint because there's a certain unknown component attached to them. Like he could turn out to be very, very good once he gets more and more opportunity. And so you're kind of chasing that. In addition to the opportunity, it's the fact that the ceiling could be very high and we just haven't seen it yet because we haven't seen him that much yet.
Yep. The other guys are really handcuffs and guys that you maybe could have some standalone value during the bye weeks. Jalen Warren got a bunch of touches last week for the Steelers. Tajay Spears came back last week, and Tony Pollard's not 100%. Gus Edwards had double-digit carries last week for the Chargers, even if you're just picking him up as a handcuff for Dobbins. Trey Benson for the Cardinals. I know they're off this week, but you could potentially stash him. He's been getting a little bit more burn, and you certainly want him if you have James Conner. And then Cam Akers, which it just surprised me because I kind of like Ty Chandler as a sleeper this year, and it did not materialize. But Cam Akers is now the handcuff for Aaron Jones. It's not Chandler anymore. And we know Aaron Jones gets dinged, which, I mean, it feels gross to want to pick up Cam Akers, but he is the handcuff for Aaron Jones right now, it seems.
Yeah, Aaron Jones was on Kay Adams and talked about the fact that he was carted off the field. And the reason why he was carted off the field, he told her it was because the x-ray machine was on the whole other side of the stadium. So like they were using it like a ride as opposed to a serious injury. So he's like he's okay, but that's obviously something to monitor. I'm on the confusion about Cam Akers and Ty Chandler just because also they had Cam Akers last year and Ty Chandler, right, as the backups there in Minnesota, and it kind of was like flipped last year. So
Yep. Yep.
I'm not sure why Cam seems to be the guy this season. Let's pivot to wide receivers and people that are still available on the waiver wire.
I've had Cedric Tillman on this list for 3 weeks, and he is still available in leagues, mostly on ESPN and Yahoo. And maybe it's because the Browns are on a bye, but
Yeah, I think.
geez Louise, guys, go get him for crying out loud. Juwan Jennings is the same thing. He's mostly already owned like on Sleeper, but ESPN, Yahoo. If somebody's still out there that is really good in like 40% of leagues, I'm going to put him in here because I want to nail down that like he should be 100% owned. Tillman,
100%.
Jennings, both of them.
Yep.
Speaking of the Niners, Ricky Pearsall also is going to be a very popular name after he had a very good game last week.
Yeah.
Quentin Johnson, he's not Chris Carter, but all he does is score touchdowns sometimes. I mean, he's been very good. And you
Somebody's
mentioned the matchup this week against the Bengals. It's a plus matchup. So
yeah.
I may end up starting him in one of my leagues this week or a couple.
Yeah, somebody's
Marcus
got to be on
Valdez
the
Scantling.
receiving end of Justin
Yeah,
Herbert's
yeah.
beautiful dots that he's
Oh,
throwing.
you're back in love. Marcus Valdez Scantling, he's probably gonna have no catches this week because that's just the way that it goes with him.
Yeah.
But he is worth an ad because the Saints have no wide receivers, and at
Yeah.
least Derek Carr showed a tendency to go deep with MVS.
He's like
Rashad,
Alec Pierce, though, right? Like, and Xavier
sure,
Worthy. Like, in terms of what your expectations are, know that this is a boom bust type of situation. He's not going to get a ton of
no question.
targets. It's just going to
Mhm.
be, if they hit, it's to the moon, right? He had three targets,
Yep,
2
yeah, 3.
touchdowns, 100+ yards this past week.
Yep.
Like, that's what you're looking at in a best case scenario, but not a lot of
Mhm.
volume.
Rashad Bateman, who's coming off a pretty good game. John Mechie. Now, the last 3 all are dependent on what
Nico.
happens with players in their
Yeah.
offense. So if Nico is back, Mechie's not going to really have a ton of value. If Nico is out, and that's a Monday night game, so that kind of stinks. But Alec Pierce, you just mentioned, if Pittman can't go again, they've got the Jets. And I'm not going to say the Jets are a tough matchup anymore because they're not, because their
Nope.
defense has been very disappointing. And then if Amari Cooper can't come back and Keon Coleman's banged up, Mac Hollins is also going to be worth a look off the waiver wire.
Yeah, I'd be surprised about Mechie. I mean, like the fact that we were actually expecting Nico Collins to go, they open his window, they don't get a game out of him. I think that if he's unable to play next week, then like they just fumbled the bag. Like, why
Mm-hmm.
activate him? It just makes 0 sense to me. So I'm fully
Mm-hmm.
expecting Nico to come back next week, and I'm prepared to be let down again. No, I'm not.
No.
Tight ends, who are we adding on the waiver wire this week?
Not a super long list, but Taysom Hill is still available. Jonnu Smith has got the Raiders. They are bad against tight ends. If you're hurting, you could pick him up and start him. And then if Dalton Kincaid can't go, Dawson Knox is really interesting because the Chiefs have one of the worst defenses in the league against tight ends. It's the one position that they're vulnerable to because they've been unbelievable against running backs. You'll find out how unbelievable when I talk about James Cook and start him, sit him in a couple of days. But they give it up to tight ends. And so if Kincaid can't go this week because of his injury, Dawson Knox is going to be starting in some fantasy leagues.
Another name I'm going to throw on this list, and that is Will Dissly. Because again, we've talked about the Chargers and the fact that Justin Herbert, they've been throwing the ball more. Justin Herbert has, although 18 attempts this past week, not great. But just in general, the pass rate over expectation has gone up, and he has been the most targeted guy these last few weeks. He had 6 targets this past week, 5 catches, 30 yards. So it's a really low ADOT. You're not going to get a ton of yardage out of him, but in PPR formats, they look to be going to him a lot. The next most targeted guy in this offense this past week was J.K. Dobbins with 3 targets, and then nobody else had more than 2. So Dissly has kind of taken over that role that at the beginning of the year we thought might be Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst has come back from injury, and it has still been Dissly. I think if you're looking for like a borderline tight end type guy that you can look at, I like the matchup against the Bengals as we talked about earlier, and I think that Will Dissly has become a pretty big passing game asset for the Chargers. So that might be another name that might help you.
All right, dirtbags. Let's talk about other ways to play fantasy football. Do you guys know about Prize Picks? It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks.
You can turn your hot takes into cash, Fabs. Listen here to figure out which players have the best matchups of the week. We always talk about guys that we like more or less depending on their matchup. Then take that information and flip on over to Prize Picks. See if you think that those players that we talked about will have more or less than the numbers that they have attached to them. It could be number of catches. It could be number of yards. It could be number of touchdowns. You can do it all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick and easy. And if you have a strong take about a guy that you don't have on your fantasy team, this is the place to put that take to work for you. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code FANTASYDIRT and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FANTASYDIRT on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's like free money, guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Let's talk about defenses.
Well,
Because
wait, you skipped right over the kickers. My
well,
goodness gracious.
or I could go back to them later. Like you would, what are you like? What?
It's my OCD.
I-
In my head, it's kickers and then defenses, but that's fine.
Okay. Would
Yeah.
you like to do
No.
kickers first, Fabs? Are you going to be okay?
We could do defenses. That's fine.
Okay. Oh, I don't know. I feel like this is going to really test you. Can you
I'm gonna try.
focus? Are you going to be able to focus?
Four defenses that are on the waiver wire that will be starting this week.
Okay.
Detroit against Jacksonville and Mac Jones. The only good thing about the Jags last week was the helmets were awesome. Those white helmets were glorious. The Texans against my beloved stupid Dallas Cowboys, and they're available. The Dolphins, their defense looked good against the Rams. The Rams have a lot of talent. The Dolphins' defense looked really good, and they've got the Raiders. And it doesn't matter who the quarterback is because neither one of them is any good. And then the Packers against Caleb and the Bears. Caleb's not playing well. I don't know if suddenly because Waldron's not there anymore, it's going to do a 180. But the Packers defense is out there. And so those four defenses are all in my top 10 this week. And they're all out there at some level or another.
I don't think I can pick up the Packers defense because I want to root for the turnaround to happen.
Okay.
I don't want my
pick up one of the other
interest,
three.
my rooting interests to be conflicted. I need the Chicago offense to come back for us.
Okay.
More than I need the Packers to be a streaming defense. But that's just me. Maybe you feel differently. Let's do kickers now.
Let's do it. Man, listen, kickers are people too. Did you see all the points they scored last night? I don't think anybody started those kickers. But Jason Sanders, one of the kickers in that game, is worth an ad.
Premier kicker.
East Premier, whatever the hell that means. Jake Moody, I know he missed 3, but he hit 3 and he had double-digit fantasy points last week. And he's got a good matchup this week against Seattle. That could be a high-scoring game. And then John Parker Romo. That's right, folks. I will say this, and Lindsay, this kind of goes in line with what you talk about with kickers.
Okay.
Which is that they're somewhat interchangeable and it doesn't really matter. But listen to this, okay? On a points per game basis, right now, Austin Seibert is the best kicker in fantasy football.
Yep.
But guess what? Zane Gonzalez, who replaced him last week, had 11 points.
Oh.
11 points. Okay, so Matthew Wright, who played one game for the 49ers as their kicker before he got hurt, had 13 points. Anders Carlson, who played 2 games for the 49ers before Moody came back, averaged 12 points. So notice the trend. Jake Moody is 100% owned in fantasy leagues after this upcoming week. At least he should be. I got to be honest with you, and I love Brandon Aubrey. I'd rather have Jake Moody than Brandon Aubrey right now because Brandon Aubrey's not going to get a lot of opportunities because the Cowboys offense is weak sauce. So I would say that also.
And just to clarify real quick, because Jake Moody had a terrible game this past week. What we're chasing is the opportunity that he was put in, which was
6 field goal attempts. Yeah.
Exactly. Because you and I went back and forth. You were like, I nailed it, Jake Moody. I was like, Jake Moody sucked today. Like Debo tried to strangle him, for crying out loud. But your point, which is a good point, is that for fantasy football analysis, you're trying to gauge how many times they will have an opportunity to make those kicks. And then more often than not, they're going to make them.
Yeah. And then just the last example is Will Reichard, the Vikings kicker, who got hurt. He was averaging 9.3 points per game. That's really good. And John Parker Romo, in his first game with the Vikings, scored 13 points. You get a little trend there, kids. Those offenses, for whatever reason, allow their kickers to give you fantasy points in the form of field goals. So all three. So Parker Romo, Moody, all worth an ad this week. And dare I say, all worth starting this week. And if Seibert can't go, and that's a Thursday game, I mean, Zane Gonzalez is going to be worth a look too. I said it on the live stream that he's going to be a sleeper, and he had a good game. So it is what it is. Follow the points.